April 25, 2025, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In a dramatic escalation of the ongoing conflict between the Trump administration and the judiciary, the FBI has arrested Judge Hannah Dugan of the Milwaukee County Court on charges of obstruction of justice. The arrest stems from her alleged actions during a recent immigration hearing, where she is accused of aiding a defendant, Eduardo Flores Ruiz, in evading federal authorities. The incident, which took place on April 18, 2025, has ignited a firestorm of controversy and sparked a heated political debate. Judge Dugan, who has served on the bench since 2016, is accused of guiding Flores Ruiz, who had a pending immigration case and was facing arrest by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to exit the courthouse through a back door, bypassing waiting ICE agents. This action allegedly helped the defendant avoid being detained on the spot. However, despite this effort, Flores Ruiz was later apprehended in a brief pursuit outside the courthouse. This high-profile case is only the latest chapter in the fraught relationship between the Trump administration and various factions of the judiciary, particularly on issues relating to immigration enforcement. The arrest has prompted outrage from political leaders across the country, deepening the divide between the administration's strict immigration policies and the independence of the judicial system. As the legal and political implications of this case unfold, the clash between the executive and judicial branches is once again in the spotlight. The controversy surrounding Judge Hannah Dugan's arrest stems from a highly charged and dramatic sequence of events that took place on April 18, 2025, during a routine immigration hearing at the Milwaukee County Court in Wisconsin. At the center of this incident was Eduardo Flores Ruiz, a Mexican national who had previously been deported from the United States and was facing criminal charges, including domestic abuse. Flores Ruiz was in court for a hearing related to his ongoing legal matters, unaware that federal authorities were waiting to arrest him following the conclusion of the proceedings. Flores Ruiz's immigration history had already put him in the crosshairs of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and federal agents were stationed outside the courtroom, anticipating that the judge would finish the hearing and allow his detention as soon as the proceedings concluded. ICE agents had already secured an arrest warrant for Flores Ruiz, based on his previous deportation and his criminal charges, including domestic violence allegations. The agents were ready to take him into custody the moment the hearing ended. The situation quickly took a turn when, according to the FBI's statements, Judge Dugan allegedly instructed Flores Ruiz and his defense attorney to exit the courtroom through a back door, bypassing the ICE agents waiting at the main courthouse exit. This, the FBI asserts, was a deliberate attempt by Judge Dugan to obstruct Flores Ruiz's arrest. By leading him out through the back door, she allegedly facilitated his attempt to avoid federal detention, directly undermining ICE's authority and evading the law enforcement procedure. It is important to note that Judge Dugan had knowledge of the ICE operation, and her alleged actions have been described as both an act of obstruction and an abuse of judicial power. The FBI claims that this maneuver was part of a broader effort to shield an individual from facing federal authorities, which, if true, could carry serious legal consequences for the judge herself. The specific motivations behind Judge Dugan's decision to take such a step remain unclear, and as the investigation unfolds, more details regarding her intentions and any legal arguments she may present will come to light. Despite the attempt to assist Flores Ruiz in avoiding his arrest, it is worth noting that the situation did not end as Judge Dugan might have hoped. While the backdoor maneuver momentarily delayed the process, Flores Ruiz was ultimately apprehended outside the courthouse after a brief pursuit by federal agents. According to law enforcement, the defendant was caught relatively quickly after his departure from the back exit. ICE agents were able to track him down within a short distance from the courthouse, and he was arrested without further incident. The arrest, while somewhat delayed, triggered immediate legal ramifications. Flores Ruiz was charged with violating U.S. immigration laws, including re-entry after deportation, as well as other criminal charges related to his earlier legal issues. Despite the physical capture of Flores Ruiz, the real fallout from this event is now focused on the allegations against Judge Dugan for potentially obstructing justice. The implications of Judge Dugan's actions are enormous, as they seem to reflect a deliberate interference with federal law enforcement procedures. If these allegations are proven true, it could set a dangerous precedent regarding the role of judges in immigration enforcement cases and could raise broader questions about the independence of the judiciary when it comes to cases involving federal immigration policies. The political climate surrounding immigration law in the U.S. has been tense for years, and this incident has added fuel to an already fiery debate over the balance of power between the judiciary and the executive branch. The incident occurred in the context of heightened national scrutiny of immigration enforcement, particularly during the Trump administration, which had a well-documented history of clashing with the judiciary over its aggressive immigration policies. Throughout President Trump's time in office, the administration faced significant pushback from certain members of the judiciary who expressed concern over the potential overreach of federal immigration policies. The Trump administration's stance on illegal immigration has often been seen as hardline and, at times, controversial, with numerous instances where courts and judges across the country ruled against the administration's policies. Judge Dugan, who has been a member of the Milwaukee County Court since 2016, has worked with legal aid organizations and supported humanitarian causes throughout her career. As a judge, she was generally known for her compassion and advocacy for justice, especially in cases that involved underprivileged individuals. However, it is this same compassion that may have led to her alleged actions in this case. Whether she acted out of a sense of moral duty or whether she saw herself as upholding the rule of law by helping Flores Ruiz remain free from federal detention is a question that will likely be explored in court. Many believe that Dugan's actions were possibly motivated by concerns for Flores Ruiz's welfare, especially considering his previous deportation and the charges against him. Some legal experts have speculated that she may have believed that Flores Ruiz would face unjust treatment or hardship if immediately handed over to ICE authorities. Others argue that Judge Dugan may have been motivated by broader concerns about the Trump administration's immigration policies, which were often criticized for their harshness and the perceived disregard for due process in immigration cases. Still, others believe that Judge Dugan was simply exercising what she thought was a fair and legitimate judgment in favor of the defendant, though such a decision likely overstepped her role as a judicial officer. This controversy not only highlights a specific case of alleged obstruction but also draws attention to the broader power dynamics between the judiciary and the executive branch of government, especially as it pertains to the Trump administration's ongoing immigration enforcement policies. If Judge Dugan's actions are seen as a direct act of defiance against the federal government's legal authority, it could spur further discussions on judicial independence, accountability, and the proper scope of judicial discretion when it comes to cases involving national security and immigration enforcement. As investigations continue and Judge Dugan prepares to defend herself against the charges, the outcome of this case could potentially have profound implications for how judges across the country handle similar cases in the future. The political fallout from this incident is also significant, as it feeds into the broader debate over the Trump administration's immigration policies and the growing tensions between various branches of the U.S. government. The arrest of Judge Hannah Dugan has sent shockwaves through both legal and political circles, sparking fierce debates about judicial independence, executive power, and the balance of authority between different branches of government. As the news of her arrest spread, it immediately became a focal point for both national political leaders and legal experts, with each side offering contrasting views on the implications of her actions. Reactions from Democratic lawmakers. The arrest of Judge Dugan has drawn widespread condemnation from Democratic lawmakers, many of whom have expressed alarm over what they perceive as a direct attack on judicial independence and the core principles of the U.S. legal system. Governor Tony Evers of Wisconsin, in a public statement, called the arrest an unprecedented assault on the judiciary, warning that it could have far-reaching consequences for how the judicial branch operates in the future. President Trump and his administration have gone too far, Governor Evers said. This is an alarming attack on the independence of our courts, and if left unchecked, it could set a dangerous precedent for future political interference with the judiciary. We must not allow the executive branch to dictate how judges rule on cases that fall within their legal discretion. Similarly, Senator Tammy Baldwin, also from Wisconsin, joined other Democratic leaders in denouncing the FBI's actions. She emphasized that the issue at hand was not just about this one case, but about a broader effort to weaken judicial independence across the country. Judges must be free to make decisions based on the law, without fear of political retaliation or interference, Baldwin remarked. The Trump administration is sending a message that if a judge doesn't toe the line, they may face consequences. This cannot be allowed to continue. Many Democratic figures view Judge Dugan's arrest as part of a larger pattern of attempts by the Trump administration to undermine the rule of law, particularly with regard to policies on immigration enforcement. Representative Gerald Nadler, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, voiced concerns that the administration's tactics were an attempt to exert undue pressure on judges who have ruled against Trump's immigration policies. This is part of a coordinated attack on the judiciary that is designed to silence dissent and control outcomes, Nadler said. It threatens the integrity of our system of checks and balances. Republican and Trump administration support. On the other side of the political spectrum, the Trump administration and its allies have strongly defended the FBI's actions, viewing the arrest of Judge Dugan as a necessary measure in enforcing the law and upholding the administration's strict stance on immigration. Attorney General Pam Bondi issued a statement expressing her full support for the FBI's decision to arrest Dugan. Bondi framed the arrest as a step toward restoring order and ensuring that the law was followed without exceptions. Obstruction of justice is a serious crime, and no one, including judges, should be above the law, Bondi declared. Judge Dugan's actions undermine the efforts of federal law enforcement, and her arrest is a clear message that we will not tolerate interference in the enforcement of our nation's laws. This case is about ensuring that justice is carried out and that individuals like Flores Ruiz are held accountable for violating immigration laws. Many Republican lawmakers have rallied around the Trump administration's handling of the case, echoing Bondi's sentiment that Judge Dugan's conduct was not only inappropriate but also illegal. Senator Lindsey Graham, a staunch ally of the president, tweeted, "For many within the Trump administration and the Republican Party, the arrest is seen as part of a broader strategy to push back against what they perceive as an entrenched, liberal, judiciary that has frequently ruled against the president's policies." Legal experts weigh in, judicial independence versus executive power. The legal community has been sharply divided over Judge Dugan's arrest. Law professors and legal scholars from across the country have voiced concerns about the broader implications of this case, with many fearing that it marks the beginning of a troubling erosion of judicial independence in the United States. Professor Lawrence Tribe, a constitutional law expert at Harvard Law School, wrote in an op-ed that Judge Dugan's arrest represents a significant threat to the rule of law. Tribe argued that the judicial branch is designed to act as a check on executive power, and that actions like those of the Trump administration create a dangerous precedent of undermining judicial authority. If judges begin to fear political retribution for ruling against the administration, the very foundation of our democracy is at risk, Tribe wrote. Other legal experts, however, believe that the case against Dugan could potentially be justified based on the facts presented. Some have argued that if it is true that Dugan deliberately obstructed the lawful actions of federal authorities, then her actions could be seen as a violation of the law, regardless of her position as a judge. Professor Michael McConnell, a former judge and expert on constitutional law, suggested that while judicial independence is essential, judges must also respect the authority of law enforcement and the Constitution, especially in cases involving national security and immigration enforcement. No judge is above the law, McConnell stated. If there is credible evidence that Judge Dugan violated federal law, she must be held accountable like anyone else. A deepening divide, Trump administration's pushback versus judicial resistance. This incident highlights the ongoing conflict between the Trump administration's aggressive approach to immigration and the resistance from certain judicial figures who view some of these policies as overreaching or unconstitutional. The administration's push for tougher immigration enforcement has led to several high-profile legal battles, with federal judges frequently blocking key parts of Trump's policies, including the controversial travel bans and efforts to end DACA, deferred action for childhood arrivals. The political and legal reactions to Judge Dugan's arrest also underscore the broader issues at stake in this clash between the Trump administration and the judiciary. While the administration has claimed that its immigration policies are vital for national security, critics argue that such policies undermine fundamental human rights and bypass legal protections for individuals, particularly those in vulnerable communities. In the case of Judge Dugan, the central question becomes whether her actions were motivated by personal beliefs or whether they were in line with a larger, ideological resistance to the administration's policies. Looking ahead, potential consequences and impact on the judiciary. The arrest of Judge Dugan is likely to have significant consequences for both her career and the future of judicial independence in the United States. As the case proceeds through the legal system, it will undoubtedly fuel further debate about the role of the judiciary in enforcing or resisting executive orders, especially in matters of national security and immigration. Legal and political observers are already questioning whether this case will set a precedent for future clashes between judges and the executive branch, particularly as more contentious issues related to immigration, national security, and executive power continue to arise. If Judge Dugan is convicted, it could embolden the Trump administration to pursue similar actions against other judges who challenge its policies. However, if she is exonerated, it may provide a crucial win for defenders of judicial independence in the face of increasing political pressure. In the wake of her arrest, Judge Hannah Dugan has vehemently denied the charges against her, asserting that her actions were consistent with her responsibilities as a judge and that she did not engage in any criminal activity. Dugan has maintained that her decisions throughout the case were motivated by her commitment to ensuring fairness in the courtroom, and she has vowed to vigorously defend herself against the allegations of obstruction of justice. Dugan's defense and legal arguments. Judge Dugan has publicly stated that the decision to allow Eduardo Flores Ruiz to leave the courtroom through a back door was not intended to obstruct federal authorities but was instead based on her belief that he was entitled to a fair hearing and due process under the law. In a brief statement after her arrest, Dugan emphasized her long-standing commitment to upholding the legal principles of justice, stating that her career has been defined by advocating for equal treatment under the law, especially for those involved in the immigration system. I have always believed in the principle of justice, fairness, and protecting the rights of every individual, regardless of their background, Judge Dugan said in her initial public response. The actions I took on that day were within my purview as a judge to ensure that Mr. Flores Ruiz's rights were respected. I am confident that when all the facts come to light, it will be clear that I acted within the boundaries of the law. Dugan has also stated that she is prepared to present her side of the story in court. Her legal team is currently preparing a defense, which will likely include arguments centered around judicial discretion and the rights of individuals facing deportation. Legal experts speculate that her defense might hinge on the claim that she was exercising her responsibility to protect the constitutional rights of the defendant, especially in a highly charged immigration case. Her attorneys have suggested that the decision to escort Flores Ruiz out of the building through the back exit was a routine safety measure and not an attempt to evade federal law enforcement. They have pointed out that many courthouses employ various security protocols for high-risk cases, which may include escorting defendants discreetly for safety reasons. The defense will likely argue that there was no ill intent behind Dugan's actions, and that she did not act to deliberately thwart law enforcement's efforts to apprehend Flores Ruiz. Public statements and media appearances. Since the arrest, Judge Dugan has been largely silent in public appearances but has maintained that she will fully cooperate with the investigation. However, her legal team has been vocal, condemning what they describe as an overreach by the Trump administration and federal authorities. In a statement released to the media, Dugan's attorneys called the arrest politically motivated and part of a broader attempt to undermine judicial independence. This is a gross abuse of power, said Dugan's lead attorney, William Harrison, in a press conference. Judge Dugan was simply carrying out her judicial duties, exercising her discretion in a case that involved significant questions of fairness and due process. To accuse her of obstruction is both unfounded and unjust. Her defense also argues that Judge Dugan acted within her judicial discretion, a concept central to the independence of the judiciary. They maintain that she did not break the law but rather made a decision based on her interpretation of the facts before her. The defense team has highlighted Dugan's extensive legal background, which includes a history of working with immigration advocacy groups, and suggested that her professional commitment to justice guided her actions. Support from legal aid and advocacy groups. Judge Dugan's arrest has prompted expressions of support from various immigration advocacy groups and legal aid organizations, which have rallied behind her, arguing that her actions were consistent with her long-standing efforts to protect vulnerable individuals in the immigration system. Organizations such as Immigrant Justice Network and American Civil Liberties Union (ACLU) have publicly voiced their belief that Judge Dugan acted out of concern for the fair treatment of a defendant who was facing deportation. Mark K. Thompson, a legal expert and advocacy leader, expressed support for Dugan in an interview, stating, "What Judge Dugan did was not obstruction but a necessary exercise of her duty to ensure that the individual before her was not unfairly subjected to the aggressive and often unjust practices of ICE. She acted within her power as a judge to ensure that justice was served, and we stand by her." The ACLU issued a statement calling for a thorough investigation of the incident but argued that there should be a closer examination of the broader immigration enforcement system and its treatment of undocumented individuals, particularly those with existing legal proceedings. "We believe Judge Dugan was acting out of concern for the due process rights of an individual who was caught in a highly politicized and unfair system," said Jill Robinson, an attorney for the ACLU. "This is not an isolated incident. There is a broader pattern of individuals being swept up in ICE enforcement actions without adequate consideration for their legal rights, and this must be examined as a whole." Potential challenges in her defense. As the legal proceedings move forward, Judge Dugan's defense will undoubtedly face significant challenges. Federal prosecutors are expected to focus on whether her actions were truly an obstruction of justice, as claimed, or whether they were justified under the legal protections that judges are afforded. The prosecution may argue that by circumventing the ICE agents, Judge Dugan took it upon herself to override a lawful federal action, and that this was a clear breach of her judicial responsibilities. The prosecution will likely present evidence of Flores Ruiz's criminal history and his previous deportation, arguing that he was a serious immigration violator and that his detention was necessary under U.S. immigration law. The government will assert that judges do not have the discretion to selectively interfere with federal enforcement actions, especially in the context of deportations. Another challenge for Dugan's defense will be the public perception of her actions. As a judge, Dugan is held to a higher standard of conduct, and her decision to aid a defendant in avoiding detention by federal authorities could be seen as a breach of her duty to uphold the law. The defense must address this head-on, providing a clear explanation of why Dugan believed her actions were justified and how they aligned with her professional ethics. Looking ahead. Judge Dugan's response to the charges and the subsequent legal battle will be pivotal in determining the outcome of this case. The ongoing investigation, her court appearance scheduled for May 15, 2025, and the eventual trial will likely provide a clearer picture of her motivations, the legality of her actions, and the broader implications of this case on judicial independence and the relationship between the executive branch and the judiciary. In the coming weeks, as more details emerge, the national conversation surrounding this case will likely continue to evolve, with significant political, legal, and ethical questions at play. Judge Dugan's legal defense will be one of the key factors in shaping how this case impacts the larger debate on the limits of judicial discretion and the independence of the judicial system in the face of executive pressures. The arrest of Judge Hannah Dugan is not just an isolated event, it is part of a larger, ongoing conflict between the Trump administration and the judiciary, particularly around the issue of immigration enforcement. This case serves as a stark reminder of the complex and often contentious relationship between the executive and judicial branches of government, especially when it comes to national security and immigration policies. As the details of Judge Dugan's arrest unfold, it becomes clear that the implications of this incident stretch far beyond her individual case. The most significant concern raised by Judge Dugan's arrest is the potential erosion of judicial independence. In the United States, the judiciary is expected to serve as an impartial body, free from political influence, ensuring that all individuals receive a fair hearing under the law. Judicial independence is a cornerstone of the legal system, allowing judges to make decisions based on the law and the facts of a case, rather than being swayed by political pressure or executive orders. However, as seen with the arrest of Judge Dugan, the actions of the Trump administration have increasingly been perceived as attempts to undermine the autonomy of the judicial branch. The arrest itself could be seen as a warning shot, indicating that judges who resist or defy the administration's policies may face consequences, whether through political or legal retribution. The arrest has already triggered alarm among legal scholars, who worry that such incidents could discourage judges from ruling independently or challenge laws that they deem unconstitutional or unjust. Legal experts argue that political interference in judicial matters is a dangerous precedent. Professor Lawrence Tribe, a constitutional law expert at Harvard University, expressed concerns that this case could embolden future attempts by the executive branch to intimidate judges into compliance with its policies. If judges feel threatened by potential political retribution for making unpopular rulings, it undermines the very foundation of our judicial system, Tribe said. Judges must be able to act without fear of reprisal. Tensions between immigration enforcement and judicial oversight. This case also highlights the growing tension between aggressive immigration enforcement policies and the role of judges in overseeing such actions. Under the Trump administration, the United States has pursued some of the most stringent immigration policies in recent history, including large-scale deportations, the construction of a border wall, and efforts to end asylum protections for many migrants. While these policies have been supported by many in the administration, they have also faced significant resistance from judicial bodies, including individual judges and courts that have ruled against parts of the president's agenda. In particular, the immigration courts have become a battleground for this clash, with many judges being forced to navigate the tension between enforcing federal immigration laws and upholding the constitutional rights of individuals, particularly those who may face deportation. Judge Dugan's arrest exemplifies this broader struggle. While she is accused of obstructing federal authorities, some observers argue that her actions reflected a moral stance against what she perceived as an unjust immigration system, especially in cases involving people who are at risk of being separated from their families or sent back to dangerous conditions. Immigration advocates have long criticized the administration's aggressive tactics, arguing that they violate the due process rights of immigrants. Judge Dugan's actions, while controversial, can be seen as part of a broader resistance to policies that many view as inhumane or overly harsh. As such, her arrest has sparked renewed debates about how far judges should go in standing up to policies they consider harmful, and whether they should be punished for doing so. The arrest has already created significant political fallout, particularly within the Democratic Party, which has long been a vocal critic of the Trump administration's immigration policies. Governor Tony Evers and Senator Tammy Baldwin, both from Wisconsin, have condemned the arrest, calling it an unprecedented attack on the judiciary and a violation of the separation of powers. They argue that such actions not only undermine judicial independence but also erode the trust that Americans place in the fairness of the legal system. This political outcry reflects a broader concern that the executive branch's growing influence over the judiciary could diminish the system of checks and balances that has traditionally governed the U.S. government. Representative Gerald Nadler, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, remarked that this case is a stark reminder of how the Trump administration has sought to control every aspect of government, including the courts. It is a dangerous step toward undermining the independence of the judiciary, which is fundamental to our democracy. On the other hand, the Trump administration and its supporters have framed the arrest of Judge Dugan as a necessary measure in enforcing the rule of law. Attorney General Pam Bondi has defended the FBI's actions, arguing that Judge Dugan's decision to obstruct an ICE operation was unlawful and must be held accountable. The law must be enforced, and judges cannot be allowed to pick and choose which laws they will enforce, Bondi said. This is about ensuring that everyone, including judges, follows the law. One of the key concerns raised by legal and political analysts is the potential precedent this case could set. If Judge Dugan is convicted and punished for her actions, it could embolden the Trump administration to take more aggressive actions against judges and legal officials who challenge its policies. Conversely, if Dugan is acquitted, it may send a strong message to the judiciary that judges can stand up to the administration without fear of political retribution. In either case, the outcome of this trial could shape future conflicts between the executive branch and the judiciary, particularly as the U.S. continues to grapple with contentious issues related to immigration, national security, and civil rights. Legal experts warn that the implications of such conflicts could extend beyond just the Trump administration, potentially affecting future administrations' relationships with the judiciary. At the heart of the controversy lies the question of whether the rule of law is being upheld, or whether it is being manipulated for political gain. Judge Dugan's arrest has fueled public distrust in the legal and political system, particularly among those who feel that the immigration policies pursued by the Trump administration are excessively punitive. The public's confidence in judicial impartiality is at stake, and as more details emerge, it will be critical to examine how this case impacts public perception of the justice system and its ability to function independently. Moreover, the politicization of the judiciary, whether perceived or real, could have lasting consequences for the future of U.S. law. As the balance of power continues to shift, both the executive and judicial branches will need to carefully navigate their roles in a rapidly changing political environment, where the line between enforcement and justice is becoming increasingly blurred. Internationally, the arrest has attracted attention from legal scholars, human rights organizations, and foreign governments concerned about the health of the U.S. judiciary. Countries with democratic judicial systems are watching closely, as the outcome of this case could provide insights into how judicial independence is maintained or undermined in a politically charged environment. As the legal and political storm surrounding Judge Hannah Dugan's arrest continues to intensify, the next steps in this high-profile case will be critical in determining not only Dugan's fate but also the future of judicial independence and the broader relationship between the executive and judicial branches of the U.S. government. In the coming weeks, several key developments are expected, with significant legal, political, and public consequences. One of the most immediate next steps in the case is Judge Dugan's upcoming court hearing, scheduled for May 15, 2025. This hearing will likely be the first time the public will hear in more detail about the evidence against Judge Dugan, her defense strategy, and the legal arguments that will shape the course of the trial. Legal experts anticipate that Dugan's defense will focus on two main points: judicial discretion and due process. Judge Dugan's legal team will likely argue that her actions were justified by her belief that Flores Ruiz's rights were being violated and that she acted in good faith, as part of her duty to uphold constitutional protections. They will likely assert that her decision to escort Flores Ruiz out of the courthouse was not an obstruction of justice, but a standard security measure intended to ensure the safety and fair treatment of the defendant, especially in a sensitive immigration case. On the other hand, federal prosecutors are expected to present a strong case of obstruction. They will argue that by instructing Flores Ruiz and his attorney to bypass federal agents waiting outside, Judge Dugan directly interfered with a lawful law enforcement operation. The prosecution will likely emphasize that no judge has the authority to countermand federal authorities, especially in the case of immigration enforcement, where ICE's role is clearly defined by law. The upcoming hearing will be an important moment not just for Judge Dugan's case, but for the future of judicial power in the United States. If Judge Dugan is able to successfully defend her actions, it could reinforce the notion that judges have the right to challenge executive authority when they believe it oversteps constitutional bounds. Conversely, if she is convicted, it could set a troubling precedent where judges are held accountable for exercising their discretion, potentially discouraging others from acting in similar ways. As the legal proceedings unfold, public reaction to the case will continue to play a significant role in shaping the broader discourse. The case has already sparked intense political division between Republican and Democratic lawmakers, with Democrats largely condemning the arrest as an infringement on judicial independence and the Trump administration framing the arrest as necessary to uphold the rule of law. In the coming weeks, it is likely that the political rhetoric surrounding the case will become even more pronounced. Key figures within the Democratic Party, such as Governor Tony Evers and Senator Tammy Baldwin, are expected to continue voicing their opposition to what they perceive as an overreach by the executive branch. These leaders will likely use the case to rally their base and highlight the dangers of a politicized judiciary, arguing that judicial independence is vital to the integrity of the legal system. In contrast, Republican figures, particularly those in the Trump administration, are expected to continue framing the arrest as part of a broader effort to combat judicial overreach. Attorney General Pam Bondi and other members of the administration will likely continue to defend the FBI's actions, emphasizing that no one is above the law, even judges. This could fuel an ongoing narrative about the need for accountability in the judiciary and further cement the Trump administration's stance on its immigration enforcement policies. The case could also provide a rallying point for various immigration advocacy groups, who will continue to argue that Judge Dugan's actions were motivated by a desire to protect the rights of immigrants facing deportation. Groups such as the ACLU and Immigrant Justice Network have already expressed their support for the judge, and they will likely continue to press for a broader conversation about the fair treatment of immigrants under U.S. law. 3. Broader impact on judicial independence. Beyond the immediate legal battle, the Dugan case is expected to have long-term consequences for the future of judicial independence in the U.S. If Judge Dugan is convicted, it could serve as a chilling warning to judges across the country about the potential consequences of acting against federal law enforcement, particularly when it comes to immigration enforcement. Legal scholars are already speculating that such a conviction would embolden future administrations to take stronger actions against judges who challenge executive policies, whether through the judiciary or other legal channels. On the flip side, if Dugan is acquitted or her conviction is overturned on appeal, it could reinforce the power of the judiciary in the face of executive overreach. A victory for Dugan would bolster the idea that judges must be able to act independently, even if their decisions challenge the priorities of the current administration. This would serve as a significant affirmation of the separation of powers and judicial oversight in the United States. 4. Potential for a Supreme Court challenge. Given the high-profile nature of the case, it's also possible that Judge Dugan's case could eventually reach the U.S. Supreme Court. If the case involves complex questions about the scope of judicial authority, the separation of powers, and executive power, there may be calls for the highest court in the land to weigh in. A Supreme Court ruling on the matter could have profound implications for future disputes between the judiciary and the executive branch, especially when it comes to immigration law and the role of judges in upholding or resisting federal policies. While it is too early to predict whether the Supreme Court will take up the case, the potential for a landmark ruling is very real, as the court's decision could define how the judicial branch interacts with executive agencies, particularly in cases involving national security and immigration enforcement. 5. Long-term effects on U.S. immigration policy. This case could also have broader consequences for immigration policy in the U.S. If Judge Dugan's arrest leads to a broader legal challenge to immigration enforcement policies, it could spark more significant debate over the administration's hardline stance on immigration. The Trump administration's aggressive immigration measures, including mass deportations, family separations, and controversial detention policies, have already sparked significant legal challenges. A ruling in favor of Dugan could serve as a victory for immigration advocates and could lead to further scrutiny of ICE's tactics and the broader treatment of immigrants in the U.S. On the other hand, a conviction might send a message that immigration enforcement takes precedence over judicial discretion, making it harder for judges to exercise their power in cases involving immigration law.